Women's Bet Midrash Motzei Yom HaShoah talk. First of all, I'm going to apologize because our main guest, Livia, feels ill and she's hospitalized since last night. So we're going to hear her speak. We're going to hear her recording, but we're not going to be able to hear her. And I hope that after she feels well, she'll be able to come back and speak to us live. So I'm going to say a few words about her, and then we'll watch together her recording. So Professor Livia Bitton Jackson is a well-known author and educator. She was born in Czechoslovakia. When she was 13 years old, she and her family were taken away to the ghetto. And later, she arrived to Auschwitz. She was liberated in 1945 and came to the US on a refugee boat in 1951. She then studied at NYU, from which she received a PhD in Hebrew culture and Jewish history. She has written 7 books about her experiences and her story of survival. We're very honored and privileged to watch her testimony and share it with you tonight. We really want to thank the people who made this night happen. This night was dedicated by Jackie and Benji Gross in memory of Alex Gross and Rabbi and Rebbetzin Raphael Ze'ev and Mariette Sinberg. Thank you so much, everybody, and let's watch Livia together.
I was born in Czechoslovakia in a small town in Slovakia near the capital city of Bratislava. Bratislava, some people know it as Pressburg in German, Pozsony in Hungarian. Bratislava had 3 names because at different times, 3 different people were, were living there. Anyway, I was born in a small town near Bratislava, and we had about 500 Jews in our town. And the day before we were taken away, everybody was gathered into a large auditorium, and the German photographer took our pictures, everybody's picture. So, but before he starting to take the pictures, he said to the men in German, Mütze ab, take off your hats, everybody. So even the rabbi, who was a very, very frum guy with a long white beard and a white payas, took off his hat. The only person among the 500 who did not take off his hat was my father. And everybody told him, Marthe, take off your hat. He said to take off your hat. He says, I don't have to stand, in Yiddish it's called Warhapeti, meaning with uncovered head until he takes my picture. When I'll stand before him and he will ask me to take off my hat, I'll take it off. So the only one who did not take off his hat was my father. And when he stood before the photographer, he did not tell him to take off his hat. So I have my father's picture with his hat on. And that's the reason, I want to show you just the picture. But that's the reason that I have this picture, because when we came back from the camps, I remember this thing that there was a photographer who took pictures. So I wanted to see pictures of my members of the family who did not come back from Auschwitz, and I wanted to have their picture. So I went to the photographer's house, and he was not there. He ran away from the Russians because in the meantime, the Russian army occupied my town. As a matter of fact, when I went to the photographer's house, it seems they were eating lunch, and they ran away while eating lunch. So the food was still on the table. Can you imagine? So anyway, then I went into the backyard, and in the backyard he had a few huge baskets with negatives of pictures. I went through his drawers. I did not find any pictures. But when I went to the backyard, I found the negatives. And you know what were the negatives in that time? There was no plastic yet. Can you imagine? 1945. There was no plastic, so the negatives were all glass plates, glass. And I went through all the baskets and I managed to find the picture of myself because I had braids and no other girl had braids in my town. I found also the picture of my father because he was the only one with a hat on. And that was different, so I was able to recognize it. I also found the negative of the rabbi because he was the only one with a beard in our town. As a matter of fact, I picked up that glass plate with the beard, and years later, I met the rabbi's daughter in America, in New York, and I gave her her father's negative, and she could not stop crying. When she got the negative of her father's picture, she started sobbing, and she was so grateful because we had nothing. When we came back from the camps, we had nothing. We could not find our relatives. Unfortunately, everybody was gone. And then at least pictures. So this was one way of memory to remember them. On March 17, 1944, the Germans occupied Hungary. By that time, we were under Hungarian occupation, even though my village was Czechoslovakia. But in 1938, Hitler and the Hungarian governor, Horthy, made a deal between them. So Hitler allowed Horthy to come and occupy that part of Slovakia where I lived. So we were taken over by the Hungarians. And by the way, that was lucky for us because the Slovak Jews were already sent away to Auschwitz in 1942. And we were taken to Auschwitz only in 1944. And those 2 years made a tremendous difference. From the Slovak Jews, very few returned because those 2 years in the camps were horrible. There were shootings, there were mass killings, and the Slovak Jews underwent much, much harsher realities than the Hungarian Jews 2 years later. So first of all, for us, it was later, so we were less time in the camps to begin with. Secondly, the Hungarian Jews were treated much better in Auschwitz than the Slovak Jews. And I can't explain why, I don't know. Maybe because it was already later in the war and the Germans already were concerned, what will the Allies think of them? It's possible. But all I can tell you is that when we got to Auschwitz and I met Slovak Jews, my heart was breaking because they have undergone so much more torture and so much less of them survived than of the Hungarian Jews. Anyway, so I told you the occupation was in March 1944, and then immediately it was declared that the town will be Judenrein. Judenrein means free of Jews. Actually, Rein means clean, clean of Jews, because the Jew was called dirty Jew. So the Jews really infected the populace. That was the myth about Jews, that they're dirty and they bring disease. And when the town becomes clean of Jews, the town will be healthy and well. So as soon as the Germans marched in, we were told to hire a coach, a carriage with horses, and put one room furniture we can put on this wagon. And we were from then taken to a ghetto. This ghetto was called Nagy Magyar. It was about 20 kilometers from our town. In the ghetto, we were only about a month, but during that month, my father was taken away. He was told to appear early the next morning at the gate of the ghetto. And I asked my mother, please, wake me up, because he had to appear at the gate of the ghetto at 5 a.m. And I asked my mother, please wake me up so I should be able to say goodbye to Daddy before he's taken away. I was very much attached to my father. I loved him very much. And also there was certain emotional connection, or maybe intellectual connection between us, because he was a big Talmid Chacham, and also he was very athletic. Every sport that you can imagine he knew, and he was teaching my brother and myself. But my brother was not inclined for sport, but I was very much into sport. So he taught me to swim. He took me to skate. He taught me to ski. We went together to the Tatras and we were skiing down the hill, whereas my brother was not inclined. My father called him der Bleierner Feigl, which means in Yiddish, a leaden bird, that everything he tried to teach my brother was not good at it. So I was good at skiing, I was good at skating, and I was also very good at swimming. Anyway, my father was taken away from the ghetto, but in the evening when they announced that at 5 a.m. he has to go to the gate, I knew that I'll never see him again. You know, it's amazing how the people in the ghetto and throughout always believed that this is not serious. All this that is happening to us will pass and soon we'll be back. The war will be over and we'll be back home. And I was only a 14-year-old girl, and yet I believe that this is not going to go over And I believe that if my father is taken away at 5 a.m. in the morning, I'll never see him again. That was my feeling. And being that I begged my mother to wake me up at 5, and she didn't. And I woke up when I heard horses, uh, horses, going and carriages going. I jumped up and in my pajamas, I ran to the gate of the ghetto and my father was gone already. I saw only his back. He had a very, very handsome, athletic figure. So I saw his white shoulders and his neck and his hat, the way the hat is here. But from the back, I saw him as he was leaving, and I was screaming and crying. And I was screaming, "Daddy, I'll never see you again." And my mother said, "Quiet, quiet. You will see Daddy. We'll see him. This will be over soon, and we'll all see each other." The other amazing factor was that all the people in the ghetto or at home or later on took everything quietly. Nobody cried. Nobody screamed. I was screaming and my mother said, "Shush, still, don't scream. Don't make the people feel bad." The people somehow, maybe they felt by being silent, they were able to cope with it. Later on, also, when we were put on the trains, about a month later, we were put on trains. The trains arrived, and from the ghetto, we were put on trains, crowded into cattle cars, or actually, they were not really cattle cars because cattle cars have a little window to let the cattle get some air. But these were cars that were for delivering goods like wheat and not living creatures. So in these cars, there was no window. And we were put into these cars, squeezed together. Another thing, my brother, I had a 4-year-old brother, whom I told you he wasn't very athletic. He wanted to wear a hat already as a young boy because he was just wearing a boy's cap. And my parents told him that when we'll be 18 years old, he will get a hat. So then when they took away my father from the ghetto, my brother asked my mother, "Can he wear my father's hat?" Because my father couldn't wear his hat when they took him away. They took off his hat, and that's how he was taken away. So my brother got his hat, and he was wearing this hat. As you see, he put it on his head, and he wore it from the moment my father was taken away. And when we were put on the trains, we were crowded. It was amazing. They crowded us so like sardines into a can. And it was very, very uncomfortable. But we had no choice. We were crowded in. People were sitting, of course, on the floor who could. My brother was lucky. He managed to get a seat next to the wall, and he was wearing my father's hat. The whole time while we were taken away to Auschwitz in the cattle cars, he was sitting, people, lay down on the floor. We were sitting on the floor, and I managed to lie down in my mother's lap, put my head down. But my brother did not put his head down the whole time because he was having my father's hat on his head. The trip took, they put us on the trains on a Thursday afternoon. Now, all night, Thursday night, all day Friday, all day Shabbat, the train was just going and going. All day Sunday, Monday morning, we arrived. And while we were in the trains, people kept saying, "Where are they taking us?" We had no idea. The train was just going and going, and we felt like cattle, not being told where we are going, nothing. We were not given any human help. For instance, just to give you an example, shortly after we were locked in the train, there was an old man, and he said, "Look, I have a huge pot for making soup, a soup pot. I took it with me because I love soup very much, and I was hoping that wherever they're taking us, I will be able to make soup for myself. So now that I have this pot, and we are all human beings, and we are locked in here, and we have no way of taking care of my human needs. So here is my pot. Whoever has to move his bowels or has to pee, just say the pot, please, and we'll move the pot to the person, and he'll be able to relieve himself into the pot. And then, you see, in the train, there was a narrow opening between the doors. As the doors closed, they put a lock on it, but there was a slight narrow opening. So he says, then we'll pass the pot to the person who sits near the opening, and he will empty it through the crack in the doors. And this is really what happened. Every time somebody had to relieve himself, the pot was moved to the persons. He would say, "May I have the pot, please?" And then everybody would turn his head away, not to watch while the person is relieving himself. And that's how we took care of our needs. The trip took 2.5 days. They locked us in on Thursday. Friday all day, the car was going. Shabbat all day. Sunday all day. Monday morning, we arrived to a place. The train stopped. All the way while we were going, we were wondering, where are they taking us? So all the people said, somebody suggested maybe they're taking us to Auschwitz. So then everybody said, no. Auschwitz is for Polish Jews. We are Czech and Slovak Jews. They're taking us to Theresienstadt, not to Auschwitz. Don't worry. And then the train went and went. And we said, but if they're taking us to Theresienstadt, we should be there already. That's in Czechia. And it was so near. They're taking us much further away. And my teacher from the school, who was sitting next to the, okay, thank you. My teacher who sat, who looked out the crack in the doors, they're taking us eastward, not westward, not going to Theresienstadt, which is west of Bratislava. They're taking us eastward. But if they're taking us eastward, where are they taking us? I said, don't worry. We will be okay. Nothing will happen to us. But the person who said maybe they're taking us to Auschwitz, everybody started saying, no way, we cannot. Auschwitz, they take only Polish Jews. Hungarian Jews are not taken to Auschwitz. You will see. So we were wondering. And then Monday morning, the train stopped and the doors opened. And I see the sign on the train station says Auschwitz. So we arrived in Auschwitz, no matter how we were hoping that we're not going to be taken to Auschwitz. And right away, 2 Germans jumped in the train and shouted, "Heraus, alles heraus," everybody. Now, my mother, in a pillowcase, packed food for us, a roast chicken and another piece of roasted goose and all kinds of food. And the whole time, while I was hungry or my brother was hungry, Anyuka said, my mother said, no, we can't eat. We'll have to keep it for later. When we arrive, who knows how long it will be before they give us food, so we'll keep it. But when we arrived in Auschwitz, they said, "Heraus, alles heraus." And we had to leave the wagon and not being able to take anything with us. I had, in a pillowcase, I saved my favorite pictures and also my favorite book. I wrote poetry on pieces of paper, but during the ghetto, I collected all my poems into a notebook. And that notebook also I was putting in that pillowcase. But now we were not allowed to take anything with us, not a sweater or a jacket. And it was bitter cold. When we arrived, they opened the gates of the doors of the cattle car, and the cold air was so powerful. You see, you have to imagine for 2.5 days, you are logged into one car, and everybody, of course, their body heat. It was very warm in there. And now all of a sudden, the bitter cold hit us. And they said, "Raus," and we were not able to take not the food that we took with us. And I took along, I had a beautiful sweater my mother had just knitted for me. And all that I had to leave in the car and just get out just as I was in a dress bitter cold, early morning. And right away they shouted, men to the left and women to the right. And of course, my father was not with us anymore. And my brother, as he jumped out of the car, and the whole time he was wearing my father's hat. Now also he had my father's hat on. And they said, men to the left and women to the right. So my brother right away went to the left. And then he remembered that he didn't say goodbye to my mother. So he turned back to say goodbye to my mother. And the German gave him a big hit on his back. And he fell down. And his hat fell off his head. And he got up and he wanted to run back for the hat. And the German gave him another hit over the head. And he ran away. And as we were marching to the right, to the gate of Auschwitz, I saw my father's hat between the train tracks. That was my last view of my father. And at that moment of my brother as well. And my mother and I, and my aunt, yes, my Aunt Serena was with us, my mother's older sister was with us, and we were marching towards Auschwitz. 5, we had to make it 5. And then we arrived at the gate, the famous gate of Auschwitz that you see in pictures. We arrived at the gate and they told us women with children up to the age of 16 to the left. Girls, women 16 years old and above to the right. And they were marching off to the right. And women with children between the ages of, babies and to the left. So we were marching to the left, my mother and myself. And I was marching with my best friend. Her name was Waldman Bobby Waldman. I was marching with her and her mother and all my other friends, my age, to the left. And as I crossed already, marching in that lane, Mengele saw me, and I was tall for my age, and I had the blonde braids, and my features also looked German. So I looked like a German girl, tall for my age, very blonde, blue-eyed. And as I was marching, already I crossed over to the side, and we didn't know that lane marched straight to the gas chambers. Ahead of us, I saw a tower, but I didn't know that was the gas chambers. And I already was on the other side when Mengele, the German SS man who did the selection, called me and says, "Du, komm zurück. You, come back." So I came back. I stood before him. I didn't know what he wanted from me, so I was shaking like a leaf. And he said to me, "Bist du Jüdin? Are you Jewish?" Can you imagine? Here I'm in Auschwitz, going with my friends towards the gas chambers, and the assessment is asking me if I'm Jewish. And I said, "Yeah." Ich bin Jüdin. And he said to me, wie alt bist du? And I said, ich bin 14 Jahre alt. I'm 14 years old. He took one of my braids in his hand and he said to me, was für eine schöne goldene Haare hast du. What beautiful golden hair you have. And then he says, okay, now listen. Do you see to the right? There are girls marching. They are 16 years old. Go follow them and remember from now on, never say you are 14. You are 16 years old. He told me to lie to his own system in order to save my life just because I looked like a German. And then my mother looked so shocked, the wide open eyes. And he says to me, is this deine Mutter? Because she had blue eyes and very large blue eyes. And I said, yes, yeah, this is my Mutter. She said, Mutter, go mit deiner Tochter. And my aunt, Serena, my mother's sister, she screamed, Lorica, don't leave me. And my mother turned to Mengele and said, Herr Offizier, kann meine Schwester kommen mit uns? Can my sister come with us? And my aunt was not blonde and she was not tall. She was medium height and had big brown eyes. She was a beautiful woman, but had brown hair and brown eyes and was not tall. She was the favorite person in my life. She was a widow and had no children. And she constantly spoiled me with all kinds of things. She was the only one who hugged me and kissed me. My mother didn't believe in these things, hugging and kissing, because she always said, I don't want to weaken you, make you feel very vulnerable if I constantly hug you and kiss you. So Serenini was the one who did it for me. She hugged me and kissed me and baked me all kinds of cookies that I liked. Anyway, she shouted, Lorica, don't leave me. So my mother turned to Mengele and says, Herr Offizier, can my Schwester kommen mit uns? And he looked at my aunt, who was not blonde, not tall, did not have blue eyes. So she was not the German type. He said, no, she cannot, sie kann nicht. So we just left her standing there, and my mother and I, we started marching to the right, and she ran after us. Lorica, don't leave me. And ran after us. And as she ran after us, one of the Germans hit her over the head with a bat and split her head open. And I saw my aunt's head wide open and bleeding, and she fell into a puddle of blood, her own blood. And I started screaming, Aunt Serena, I'll never see you again. And I didn't know why I said that stupid thing, because that made her get up again and run after us. And once more, she was hit over the head, and the second bang killed her. She fell down in her blood, and she was dead. I bent down to kiss her and kiss her again. And my mother said, get up, let's go. So I walked away, and my darling aunt, I left her there lying in her own blood. And then we continued walking to the right towards Auschwitz. That was our arrival in Auschwitz. I don't know if I have to say more because the rest is just life in Auschwitz. Everybody knows the story. Nakom? Yeah, Eli, what do you think?
I think you could talk a little bit more about your experiences in Auschwitz.
Auschwitz, okay.
And then
So we continued. Now, when we arrived, actually, they did not take us to Auschwitz. The place where they took us was Birkenau. But Birkenau was not built yet. They brought us to a point where there was a huge waste, a huge area where there was just rough grass and rough bushes, but an open area. And eventually there was built Birkenau. That was actually Birkenau. We didn't know it at that time. We only knew that we arrived to a huge open area, an open field. And there we met my aunt, Silineni. My mother's younger sister was there. And, oh yes, before we got there, we went through a barrack. We had to go into a barrack where we had to take off our clothes. And it was a very difficult thing because the barrack was lined with German soldiers. And here we are, women, young women, told to take off our clothes. Of course, nobody started to take off their clothes. And then suddenly one German shot in the air, and that was so scary. One shot in the air, and everybody started to get undressed. So we got undressed naked in front of the German soldiers. That was the first horror to experience. I, for instance, never saw my mother naked. Never saw my mother naked. And got undressed, and many, many other women from our town, they got all undressed, naked. And from there, we moved into another part of the barracks, and there from the ceiling, water was coming down, showers. There were no shower heads, just the water was coming down from the ceiling. And then we had to move further on, and in the next section, there were sack clothes. That's what we got. You know, a sack had a hole in the middle for your head and two holes on the side for our two arms. We had to put that on, and that was what we were in. And I forgot to tell you that before we got to the showers, we went through a place where they cut our hair. They cut our hair with a shaver, with an electric shaver. They didn't cut it first with scissors, but right away with electric shaver. And for me, that was very painful because I had thick, long braids. And as they shaved my hair and part of it was still hanging, it was so painful. You can't believe it. Holding my hand while my hair is hanging, the braid is hanging on one side and the other side is already shaven. So they shaved us completely bare. And then we went to the next section where the showers, we were showers, and the next section where we got the sackcloth. And then from there, we were taken outside in a large field. There were no barracks, just this open field. And there I met my Tilineni, Anyuka's sister. And she shouted, "Booby, Booby." And she ran over, she hugged me, and she says, "How could you come here among the women, Booby?" And I said to my aunt, "I am not Booby, I'm Ellie." But with the shaved head, I looked like my brother. So that's why she started screaming, "Booby, Booby. How could you get here among the women?" So that,
Sorry.
pardon me?
No, I got a lot of questions. I thought you were I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Okay, darling. So we were hanging out in that open field. By the time Nene saw me, Anyuka was very, very tired. You know, the fact she was 45 years old. And the fact that that was considered an old person to go through the train ride and no drink, no water. We were very, very thirsty. And now we were shaved and then wearing sackcloth. So Anyuka was very knocked out. So she lay down in the sand and she took a piece of stone under her head and she fell asleep. And when I met my aunt, my mother's younger sister, I was walking around and she said, "Booby, how did you?" I said, "No, Tilineni, I'm not Booby, I'm Ellie." So she says, "Oh, Ellie, you look just like Booby." And that was the biggest compliment for me because I was always considered not very pretty, but Booby was very handsome. So now that I look like Booby, that was a big compliment. Anyway, so Tilinini said, "So you are alone here, Ellie?" I said, "No, Anyuka is also with me." So I walked her over where Anyuka was sleeping in the sand. She was just not able to cope with what was going on. So we were in that field for 2 days. In the meantime, Tilineni was taken away because she belonged to another group. She arrived with another group. So she was taken away. And then a little later, we were also taken into barracks. But the barracks also, Auschwitz was just being built. Birkenau was very new. So we were taken into barracks where there were no beds. In the barracks themselves, there was only straw, and we could lie on straw during the night.
Could you talk more a bit about your brother, about Booby, about Uncle Herschel? Maybe seeing him again later, you could talk about that.
Oh, yes. Later, by the way, I loved my brother very much. He, after the war, and also during the war, after Serenini no longer was with us, my love concentrated on my brother. I loved him so much. I was very proud of him because he was brilliant in school. When we were little kids, both my mother and my father said, Booby has a good head, Yeshlo a good cup. Booby has a good head, and Ellie has a good tuches. Now, what does that mean, a good tuches? That I was always sitting and learning. I always had to do my lessons. I always had to get an A. Nothing less was good enough for me. Whereas my brother learned very quickly. He was able to absorb and learn everything very fast, but he did not have ambition. You know, he knew the things, but he never strove to be better and better. I, on the other hand, always strove. So my father used to say, with a good tuches, you can achieve more than with a good head. A good tuches. I was very, very ambitious. Yes, I looked up to my brother. He was considered brilliant, whereas I was not considered brilliant. I was just considered very, very what's the word they say? I was very, besides ambitious. When you're a good student, what do they call you? You're a good student, Yaeli.
No, driven? I don't know. But do you wanna talk about when you saw him in Auschwitz? You know?
Yes. Okay. Yes. Yeah. Well, first of all, let me remember. First, I saw him in Auschwitz, and then later we saw him in what's the name of that? Of the camp near Dachau, Mühldorf. Now, I saw him first in Auschwitz. It so happens, you see, Anyuka, how was it? Yes.
When you over the fence, Tafa, the fence. You remember that's
Okay. That was later on. It so happens in Auschwitz, he was a Dolmetscher, an interpreter for the Germans, and he got food, and he had a very beautiful outfit, a German military outfit. So once I met him in Auschwitz, as he was marching down the main road, and I couldn't believe it. It's my brother. And I screamed, Booby. He was marching down, and at that time Anyuka was sick. She was in the hospital. And Booby marched down with some Germans, and I screamed, Booby. And he stopped, and he turned around, and we hugged each other. And then I told him that Anyuka is in the hospital. So he went to the hospital to see her, but then afterwards, I did not see him. This was in Auschwitz itself. And then later on, we were taken on the trains, and we didn't know again where they are taking us. So we were taken from Auschwitz to another camp called Mühldorf. It was near Dachau. And when we got to Mühldorf, we saw the men on the other side of the fence. We always, when we arrived into a new camp, we always went over to the fence because the men were always on the other side. And we went to the fence, the barbed wire fence, and we asked about my father. I said, is there anybody here called Friedman? And is there anybody here from Shamorin? So one person came over and said, yes, there is somebody here from Shamorin, and his name is Friedman. But we said Mordechai Friedman. No, he's Friedman, but he has another name, not Mordechai. And then he came to the fence, my brother. It turned out my father wasn't there. It was my brother Friedman. And he came over to the fence and he looked horrible. He looked, there was the word Musulman for people who were already, usually the men, who were already down to skin and bones. And usually the Musulmanim, within the month of becoming a Musulman, they were dead. The Musulmanim were skin and bones and had no more koach to keep on living. And when we went to the gate and asked, is there anybody called Friedman, Mordechai Friedman? They said, no, but there is a Friedman here. His name is not Mordechai. And we said, please tell him to come to the fence later on, because there was a time later in the afternoon when the German guards allowed us to go to the fence. Earlier, we were not allowed. So we came to the fence, and that morning, every morning we got a slice of bread. I got a slice and Anyuka got a slice. So when we came to this place, Mühldorf, on the other side of the fence, we saw that the men were very, very skinny. So we thought maybe my father is there, and we ate only one slice of bread together, and the other slice we kept that we will throw it to my father in the afternoon. So we came to the fence in the afternoon, and some men came over, and as I told you already, we asked them, is there anybody from Shamorin? And is there anybody called Friedman? Mordechai Friedman. So then some men came over and says, yes, there is somebody, Friedman, here, and he is from Shamorin, but his name is not Mordechai. They didn't know what his name was. So we said, please tell that Friedman to come to the fence in the afternoon. So in the afternoon, we went back with a slice of bread. Anyuka and I, we ate only half a slice in the morning, and the other slice Anyuka held in her hand, and then somebody is approaching. He looked like not only a Muslim, but was wearing a big blanket, a gray blanket. And as he was walking, he was limping very badly. And His face was skin and bones and a very light fuzz, you know. His hair was starting to grow, light fuzz on his face. And he approached to the fence and looked at us and didn't say anything, just kept looking and looking and looking. And we stood there. And then I said to Anyuka, Anyuka, this is Booby. And Anyuka says, oh, no, this is not Booby. This cannot be Booby. And I said, Anyuka, this is Booby. And he just stared at us and didn't say anything. And then after a while, he kept staring at us. And I started crying. I said, Anyuka, this is Booby. And then finally he spoke. And he said, Anyuka, you can throw the bread over the fence. This German guard doesn't mind. And Anyuka couldn't believe it. When she heard him say that, she still didn't want to throw the bread. I said, Anyuka, please, throw the bread over the fence. It's Booby. And then finally she agreed, threw the bread over the fence, and the slice of bread fell down, and Booby bent down, and I see it with my own eyes. As Booby bent down to pick up the bread, but being that he was in such a poor condition that he wasn't able to, he fell on his face and then slowly crawled over to where the bread was. He picked it up, and then a lot of struggle, he got up, turned around, didn't say anything to us, and walked away. And Anyuka and I, we started crying. This is Booby, yes. And not only that he was in such a terrible shape, but the fact that he didn't talk to us. You know, the only thing he said is, you can throw the bread over the fence, and walked away. So we went back to the barrack, Anyuka and I, and we cried all night, non-stop. We just cried. We couldn't go to sleep. We were just crying. And then when it started dawning, I said to Anyuka, we have to go to sleep because at 7 in the morning we had to work. This camp in Auschwitz was a work camp. So we had to work, so we cannot. But it so happens, by coincidence, the night that we cried all night was the night when my father was killed. Later, we figured it out time-wise that was the night my father was shot in Bergen-Belsen.
What do you attribute your ability to think so positively, and how did you keep your faith in God? Was it ever a question for you how he could allow it?
Yes. You know, every person has a pasuk with their name. I don't know whether you are aware of it, but I was told when I was quite young, my Hebrew name is Leah. So the pasuk comes from Tehillim, which is the first letter is Lamed, and the last letter is Hey. And the pasuk is Lo amut ki ehyeh va'asaper ma'aseya, which means I will not die, I will live, and I will tell the ways of God. This is a pasuk from Tehillim. Lo amut ki ehye v'asap. My pasuk was in my mind all the time. They were very, very difficult times, and I said it out loud. Lo amus ki ehye v'asaper ma'aseka. And I kept saying it, which means I shall not die, I shall live. There were times later when my mother became very ill. She was badly injured, and it came to a point where she couldn't walk anymore. And I took her two hands on my shoulder, and this is how I walked, schlepping my mother. I was 14 years. That by the time you will be 18, you will have, what was the disease? A lung disease that was very, at that time, what was?
Polio?
No, a lung disease. What?
I didn't hear you.
I don't remember, but she was always saying, by the time you will 18, you will be so weak that you'll get, what was it was, very many people got it.
Tuberculosis.
Tuberculosis? Maybe.
Steve. Thanks, Steve.
Maybe. At that time, they did not have any cure for it. And many young people died of that lung disease. So my mother was always saying, by the time you'll be 18, you won't be able to live because you will die of weakness, because I was a poor eater. So when we were in Auschwitz, amazingly, that poor eater girl, I was schlepping my mother on my back with her two hands on my shoulder, and that's how I walk. Now, how did I have koach? How did I have the koach? It's not only the belief in the Kadosh Baruch Hu that I continued having, but also physical strength. My pasuk gave me physical strength. I said, Lo amut, I will not die. Ki echye va'asaper ma'aseka, and I will tell the deeds of God. And that pasuk gave me emunah. It's amazing what it can do. But this is the pasuk associated with my name, Leah, and that gave me the koach.
I want to say thank you to Jackie Gross again for donating this evening. And I think we should all say refuah shlema to dear Livia. And we hope and we pray to God the next time she will be with us and not in the hospital. So refuah shlema to Livia. And thank you all for coming, and have a Shabbat Shalom. Good night.
Thank you.